There's a lot of hand-holding in video games these days, both in AAA titles as well as independent releases. Every once in a while, there's nothing wrong with a tutorial, especially if the developers are throwing something brand new and revolutionary your way. But for the most part, we can usually figure things out on our own. Now, it might take a little while, but that can also be a big part of the fun. Some of the greatest video games throughout history are about discovery. Discovering new creatures in the world of Pokemon, discovering new tactics in Civilization. No matter what it is, the exciting aspects of a game are not the ones that are shoved down your throat or swept aside as unimportant. Figuring things out on your own or having a general sense of what's to come are both crucial elements in the experience of a new game. And both of these elements are not only prevalent but well balanced in The Binding of Isaac. Just for a little context, we're not talking about the original Flash version of the game. Instead, we'll be covering the greatness of the fully fledged version of The Binding of Isaac, meaning the Rebirth through Afterbirth Plus versions, which are the current editions for sale. A lot of the same topics we'll cover were also present in the original game, but with a fraction of the content as the new versions. Even the game's creator considers the old Flash version to be a hastily made eyesore. However, the current installment of The Binding of Isaac is definitely a worth your dollars per hour game in content alone, and the replayability is obviously something special with every floor, item, and encounter being randomly generated. But what really keeps players snared into playing this game is the built-in checklist of discovery. There's so much to know and so little the game tells you, but oddly enough, there's also a lot of information you could have before even making your first attempt. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we discover what's so great about The Binding of Isaac. Originally released for Windows in 2011 and subsequently remade in 2014, The Binding of Isaac is a dark, procedurally generated roguelike game created by Edmund McMillen, previous co-creator of Super Meat Boy. After the success of Super Meat Boy, McMillen figured he had enough of a safety net to try something a little riskier, and as a result of a week-long game jam with Florian Himsel, The Binding of Isaac was created. Heavily inspired by the original Legend of Zelda on the Nintendo, The Binding of Isaac boasts a roster of over 200 room layouts that are randomized into an arrangement of 10 to 20 rooms per floor, complete with a treasure room and boss room, as well as other possible rooms with specific purposes other than just housing the almost 200 different monsters in the game. While progressing through these rooms, players will also collect over 500 items and discover over 400 secrets. This game is still a relic of the figure-it-out-for-yourself era of gaming, and for a few reasons. After all, there's no telling where to go or what to do. At first, you just have to clear the rooms. You don't know which doors lead to which rooms, where items come from, and where the secrets of the game may be hidden. And as you clear each floor, a hatch opens, and your only guidance is, well, I guess I ought to go down further. And you clear the next floor, and the next one. This is all well and good, but after you die a few times, or maybe you get your first win against Mom, you might stumble over to the stats page of the menu and... what? 19 endings and a finale? And look at all these items, where am I supposed to find all of these? Even going back to the new run page, you'll notice you have your first character, obviously Isaac, and 10 other characters, 3 of whom you aren't even told how to unlock. And here's a little hint for you, there are even 4 more hidden characters not listed until after you've unlocked them, and you've got to figure out how. That's when you start noticing things changing every time you play. Maybe an item you've never seen, a boss that's never been triggered, or a new door is suddenly opened for you. And then the secrets and information just start unraveling for you in an exciting avalanche. Meanwhile, there are so many random encounters and happenings going on throughout each run. At least they seem random until you can start crossing out your variables and you start discovering why everything is happening the way it is, and how you can turn these events to your advantage. Unlocking all of the characters is a great jump back into the pre-internet era of gaming before all of the characters were just announced before release or barely hidden on a character select screen. Like seeing those silhouettes on the splash screen of Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64. You don't know who they are, but you're excited to figure it out. Or throughout the caves where, just like within the dungeons of The Legend of Zelda that The Binding of Isaac is based on, you have to use a little bit of deduction to figure out where those secret doors might be. One of the most fun aspects, oddly enough, is discovering the absolutely worst items in the game. I mean those game-ruining, I might as well start over now because this is the worst thing to ever happen to me in my life sort of items that you picked up just because you didn't know what was in store for you. The part of this that's fun is the next time you remember that item, and right before you impulsively grab it, you stop yourself, thinking, no, not today. And you realize you're learning and outsmarting the traps that the game is throwing your way. Learning for yourself is one of the greatest charms of the experience that Binding of Isaac provides its players. However, not every piece of information in the game is taught within its fourth wall. In fact, there are plenty of satisfying references and design choices that you may miss out on without some outside knowledge. There's plenty of information you can bring in from the real world that may give a little better understanding to the world you're diving into. Obviously, the basis of the game is a parallel to Christianity and the story of Isaac in the Bible. In case you're not familiar, the short version is God tells Abraham to sacrifice his firstborn, Isaac, in order to prove his faith, just as shown with Isaac's mother in the game. But aside from the main plot, there are so many other interesting references, from subtle to obvious. First off, you have all of the characters, but don't worry, we won't be discussing any of the secret ones. Your spoilers are safe. But let's start with one of the playable characters, Magdalene, or Maggie. An obvious caricature of Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' most loyal followers. But if you do a little digging, you start to find parallels beyond the name. For instance, according to the Bible, Mary had 7 demons cast out of her body, symbolized in-game by having to unlock her by maintaining 7 heart containers at one time. Mary is often depicted in paintings having long blonde hair, as well as wearing red, just like her bow in-game. You see more of these similarities with some of the other characters, like Judas starting with 3 coins to symbolize the 30 pieces of silver he was paid to betray Jesus, or Lazarus, who was supposedly resurrected 4 days after his death, so in-game he has to be unlocked by having 4 soul hearts at one time. The references go on and on, such as Azazel being a fallen angel and the obvious names of Eve, Cain, and Eden. But the references don't stop in religion, or even just Christianity. Plenty of items reference multiple branches of spiritualism, including Greek and pagan beliefs, as well as the use of Norse runes and tarot cards. And let's go beyond historic references and get to something we all enjoy here, video games. As discussed in the intro, the design of The Binding of Isaac is heavily modeled after the original Legend of Zelda on the NES, but plenty of other games were inspirational to the Nicalis team during development. Like 2 of the bosses. The Sin boss Wrath, as well as his room and attack, are all referential to Bomberman. And the Horseman Death has a scythe attack that mimics the attack of a Castlevania boss with the same name. Just browsing through the game's collectibles, I noticed 27 items at first glance that were directly parodying either Macmillan's previous games or major titles, from Pokemon to Pac-Man, even branching into card games like Magic the Gathering and Cards Against Humanity. Here's what I meant earlier about the fact that you may come into this game with more information on it than you think, before you even start your first attempt. Many games have hidden references, goofy Easter eggs, or follow the legacy of a specific game before them, but The Binding of Isaac is a game built on the foundation of so many different branches of knowledge. The game's inside jokes and hidden pieces of information are much more noticeable in an area of knowledge you're familiar with, whether that familiarity lies in religion, video games, or even memes and diseases. Maybe you're just fascinated by each sign of the zodiac. No matter which of these fields you find yourself interested in, the greater your knowledge in each aspect, the more likely you are to know what each item you stumble across does and how they might impact your game. So, now we've discussed how having more knowledge would be beneficial in understanding bits and pieces of the game, but why should that matter? If you're just playing the game and it's different every time anyway, why does that one reference to Magic the Gathering help you out? Well, it has to do with how comfortable you'll be as you progress through more challenging areas of the game. You never know what's around a corner, and early on, you may not even know how each enemy will behave. You're flying by the seat of your pants. This game is difficult and fast-paced, and every little thing helps you out. Knowledge, confidence, reflexes, really anything could help you out in a time of need to face the challenges that these dark caverns have in store for you. For instance, if you know that the ladder item from the original Legend of Zelda will help you get those items across gaps, then you even start thinking about the layouts of each room as possible puzzles. What obstacles are there and what resources do you have? Looking at the map of a floor in The Binding of Isaac is like looking at a chessboard and not knowing where the enemy pieces are. Once you run into an enemy, you're going to have to deal with it before you're going anywhere. And knowing what tools you have at your disposal is a critical piece of information to keep the game going your way. There are a lot of things that The Binding of Isaac does so smoothly. The fast-paced gameplay, the atmospheric music, all of it ties together to form just an excellent, clean game, as if that were all it had to offer. but there's so much more in store for players. The game just feels alive in tiny ways that you don't even have to focus on. Rooms open by accident, enemies attack each other, things are constantly going wrong, and chaos is happening through every threshold, but it's up to you to get everything under control. Every once in a while you have a moment to breathe and pat yourself on the back with a satisfying feeling of calm when you realize how well you're doing. That's not an easy feat in a game that is essentially a room-by-room bullet hell, which makes the little successes all the more satisfying. With unsettling character design, a labyrinthine structure, and eerie music by Ridiculon, The Binding of Isaac is a great cartoonishly dark experience in the procedurally generated side of gaming. Whether you're an expert in religion, a video game history buff, or know absolutely nothing about the outside world, this game is there to provide a fresh experience in a clash of information and worlds that never seemed like they could blend together. That is what's so great about The Binding of Isaac. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming as we plummeted through the horrific caverns of The Binding of Isaac. If you want to be a part of a positive gaming community, please take the time to subscribe to be involved in the discussions. And if you want to hear what's great about another indie game, check out the link to FTL Faster Than Light on screen or in the description. Tell us what you think about The Binding of Isaac, and if you have a favorite series or game that you think is great, leave a comment and we'll look into it. Thanks again for watching, now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.